I'm John McQuay with 8541 Tactical, and this is Mail Call Mondays, the show that answers your questions about precision rifles, optics, and equipment. Well, this Monday we are going to talk about how I prepare my ammunition for tactical rifle competitions. Now, you notice I said tactical rifle competitions. We're not trying to roll ammo for bench rest. We're not trying to roll ammo for service rifle or any other type of competition. This is for precision rifle. Now, there are a couple of different things that we do here. Now, bench rest shooters, they're looking for group size down in the teens. They're really running that ragged razor's edge. They have the time to be able to single load their ammunition and set up every shot. And very often they will only prep a handful of cases, and they will use those cases over and over again, even loading them at the range, at the firing line when they intend to shoot. We don't do that. We can go through 200, 250 rounds in a tactical rifle match. The ammo needs to be robust enough to survive rattling around in your pack out in the field, magazine loading, being able to be ejected at the end of a string of fire when we no longer need that round and we haven't fired the round that's in our chamber. All this puts some stress on that ammo and requires that we give up a little bit of that razor's edge accuracy to gain reliability. And that's really what we're looking for, reliability. The techniques that I'm going to go through here real quick with how I load my ammo will give me somewhere between a quarter-minute angle to a half-minute angle capable ammo. Now that's what the ammo is capable of when fired through the rig that we went through last week. That's not always the accuracy capability that I have, but that's what the ammo is capable of doing. I can actually take these, I can fire 5 shots when I bag the rifle in, and all 5 shots will be pretty much touching at 100 yards, if not going through the same ragged shot hole. That is the extent of the accuracy that is required for the tactical rifle competitions that I compete in. So what do we do to make this level of ammunition? Well, when I'm building ammunition for a match, I usually like to start with at least once fired ammunition. There are times when I will run new brass, but it's brass that I've already shot some out of that lot, and I know that that lot of brass, that one manufacturing run, is good to go. However, I prefer to shoot once fired because it's already gone one pass through the chamber that I'm using at these matches, so I know the brass will fit. I know that there's not going to be any problems. There are no manufacturing defects that would cause a failure in the gun. The primer pockets are going to work with the primers that I'm using, so I'm not going to have primers falling out. And I prefer once, twice, even 3 times fired. I don't want to get up into brass that is nearing the end of its life, because then we can also have failures when it's right there at the edge of its useful service life. When we're done firing it, we'll take the once fired ammo, twice fired, whatever. When it comes out of the gun and comes off the line, we'll throw it into a tumbler. Now, what I use is an old Lyman vibratory tumbler, and I will use Lyman tumbling media. This is Lyman Tough Nut, I believe is the actual brand name for it, but it is a media that has polishing compound impregnated into it. This is something similar to Rouge in the media that I'm using right now. And I will tumble it for about 30 minutes. And the reason we're tumbling it is to remove any debris, anything that has stuck to the outside of the case, any of the tarnishing that you get from your brass laying in wet grass, any dirt, mud, or vegetation that may have stuck to the outside of the case. We're getting all that off. In addition, the media works its way inside the case, and the vibration causes it to work in the case and helps scrub away some of that powder residue. We really want to make sure that the powder residue is scrubbed away from the neck, because that's what holds your bullet, and that's what helps release the bullet when the rifle fires. And we want to make sure that that is a smooth, consistent release when you're ready to fire it. I only tumble the brass for about 30 minutes because that's really what's required just to clean up all this stuff. We're shooting a precision bolt gun. We're not shooting a high mileage gas gun. So the brass really isn't getting that dirty. If you don't want to invest in a vibratory tumbler, then you can take a bore brush for the size bullet that you're using, and you could actually just wipe down the exterior of the case with a rag and maybe some brass polish. Don't use anything that's got ammonia in it, because that can weaken the brass. but some brass polish and a bore brush on a handle and scrub the neck out and you're good to go. It takes a whole lot longer than just dumping 50 or 100 cases in the tumbler and running them for 30 minutes, but you know, that's up to you. I like the tumbler because I can dump it in, I can run it, I can go do other stuff, and we're good. If you're reloading for a gas gun, you may want to run a little longer than that. It's just going to depend upon how much of that fire residue ends up on the outside of your case. Now once we've tumbled them, we're going to pull them out. Sometimes there is some residue left on them depending upon the kind of media you use. When I used to use walnut and Dillon polish, I would get a lot more dust on the cartridges when they come out of the tumbler. I will use a media separator. The one I use is actually an RCBS rotary media separator. It's got like a basket inside of it. You dump the media and brass into the basket, close that, close the lid on the separator, turn the crank a couple of times, and it will throw the media out and it will dump all the media out of your actual cartridges. This is an incredible time saver. I used to not use it. I used to just use a colander and a baking pan, and I'd dump the stuff into the colander and shake the colander, but I would always end up having to pick up each case and dump media out from inside the case. The rotary media separators are not expensive. I highly suggest you get one. They are just really a great time saver. Now when you bring them out of there, they'll still have a little bit of residue on them. If you're really anal about stuff, you can take a cloth and you can wipe that residue off. You can use compressed air to blow it off, what have you. Generally, I will just leave it on there and it works its way off through the process until I get to the final process where I wipe everything down and inspect every case. Now what we have to do is we have to get this fired primer out of the back of the case, and we need to resize the case in order to hold a new bullet. Now since we're shooting these through a precision rifle, there is not a lot of dimensional change going on in the rest of the case. The main change here is the shoulder and the neck. The neck is opening up a little bit when you release that bullet, and the shoulder is getting pushed forward to fill up the chamber. Now for reliable chambering, we want to make sure that that neck is not coming too far forward, and for reliable feeding from the magazine and reliable extraction, if you don't fire the cartridge, we need to size the neck down. Now what I like is about 2/1000 neck tension, so I really want to crush this neck down until it is 2/1000 of an inch smaller when it comes out of the die than it is when I seat a bullet. That tells me that I'm stretching the brass 2/1000 to hold that bullet. And to me, 2/1000 seems to be about strong enough that I can physically push the cartridge down on the table on the nose and not get any bullet setback, not push the bullet into there any. When I resize, because I'm using an Accuracy International that has quite a bit of camming force when I'm chambering that cartridge, I will neck size for several different firings of the cartridge until I notice that when I test the brass that it is starting to chamber a little harder. It's requiring more force on that bolt handle. At that point, I'll then set the neck back. But for most of it, I'm just using a Lee collet die to resize the neck and only the neck so I can reseat the bullet. Now once I've resized the neck of the cartridge, I'll then take it out and I will measure the cartridge length, once I've resized the neck of the brass case, I will measure the case overall length, which is from the neck to the base, and I will compare that to what my maximum length is. Now for 243, according to the Hornady reloading manual, the maximum length is 2.045 inches. So if it comes up to 2.049 inches, you're going to want to trim that brass. And the reason is, if it gets too long, then you can start to crush the neck down when you chamber the brass, and it will hold that bullet tighter than you need it to. It'll cause erratic performance downrange, and you can also have pressure spikes because it's not allowing that bullet to release as easily as it should. So if it goes beyond what the max length is, then you need to trim it back. If you don't have a print of the reamer that was used to chamber your chamber in your rifle barrel, then you need to go with what the book values are. If you have the actual print from what that chamber was cut to, then you can use what your chamber length is on the print to decide what your maximum brass length is going to be. Now when you go to trim it, there are some guys that will just trim it back a little bit. I don't like to trim very often. It adds a whole lot of extra steps because you have to deburr and chamfer and all this stuff. So I'll trim it back to the trim 2 length, which for this is 2.035. That gives me quite a bit of life before I have to trim it again. What you do is up to you. I don't have to trim very often because I'm mainly neck sizing. And when you're neck sizing and not running a really hot load, then your brass doesn't grow a whole lot. So once we've measured it, if we don't need to trim it, then there's really not a whole lot of other operations too. We can just drop it on the firing pin, or I'm sorry, the flash hole deburring to knock out any media that may have caught in there. And then I will flip it over and I will use a primer pocket uniformer, not so much to cut the primer pocket, but just to knock out the carbon and anything that's left over in the primer pocket. If I'm using new brass, then I will go ahead and uniform the primer pocket so they're all a standard depth, and that helps you get a good consistent hit from that firing pin on each primer. Now if we did have to trim our brass back to the trim 2 length, now what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to deburr and chamfer the brass to get that burr from cutting it back. So you make sure you cut the inside and the outside of that neck, and you just need to touch it just to cut that burr off. That way you don't have any problems with the burr cutting into your bullet going in or the burr causing any problems chambering it. I use a VLD chamfering tool. It has a steeper angle than the standard chamfering tool. That is really designed for VLD type bullets with that really extreme boat tail on them. It helps them seat a little bit better with less chance of damaging the outside jacket on that bullet. Again, you just need to touch them. And I will also, on our prep station, I have a bore brush chucked up in there, and I will run the case mouth down over the bore brush just to make sure that there's no other debris left in there, and we've got a nice clean neck to start with. That's all there is to prepping our brass. Now once we've prepped the brass, we'll need to go through, and this is a really good time to spot check your brass. Grab a couple of cases, make sure that they chamber in your rifle. If you get really hard chambering, then it may be time to go back and you may want to pull out that neck sizing die. You may want to put a full length sizing die in and set it to push your shoulder back about 2/1000. You can use a neck die and then a body die. If you've already run them all through neck sizing, then you may just want to use a body die that won't touch the neck. It'll only size the body of the cartridge back 2/1000. But that's up to you. I usually have a full length sizing die set up and ready to go, so it's easy just to drop it on and go. Now once we've gone through and we've spot checked our brass and made sure that they will chamber in the rifle easily, it's time to prime our brass. I use a Lee hand priming tool because it gives me a really good feel. I really haven't had a problem with crushing primers with it, and I can do a lot of brass really quickly with it. So I prefer to use that tool. Anytime you're priming brass, make sure you wear safety glasses because you are crushing a primer into the back of this brass, and the whole purpose of a primer is to be impact and crush sensitive and to detonate when it gets an impact. So make sure you protect yourself, wear safety equipment, and when you're priming, try not to have the case mouth facing you. Make sure it's facing away from you when you seat that primer with whatever tool you're using. Now once we've gone through and we've primed our brass, it's ready to go. One thing I will set back here and recommend, spot check your brass before you prime it, because if you've primed it all and then you find out that you need to go back and resize it, you will only be able to use a body die. You won't be able to use a full-length sizing die unless you go through and remove your decapping stem and all this nonsense. So it's much easier to catch a problem before you prime than it is after you prime. Once you've got them primed, go ahead and set them aside, and you'll notice we didn't do any weight sorting or any of this nonsense. If you're using quality brass like Winchester brass, Lapua, Norma, etc., then for our accuracy requirements, weight sorting is really not required. So really, you don't need to waste your time doing it. Once you've got it trimmed to length, all resized, primed, ready to go, then you're good to go. Now, when I know I'm getting ready to load and charge some cases, I will warm up my Charge Masters. We use two Charge Master 1500s in tandem here. They'll both be set at the same charge weight, and we'll just go back and forth pulling charges from them so that there is always a fresh charge ready to go. And the thing with the Charge Masters, though, is when they're sitting here in the shop, they can get cold. We want to make sure we turn them on, get some juice flowing through those scales, and let everything warm up for a couple of hours before we actually start working. I find that this really gives us the best overall result, the best accuracy. So I'll turn all the scales that we're going to use on, anything that's digital, I'll turn it on and let it warm up before we start. For this particular load, we're using 107 grain Sierra Match Kings in the 243, and we are charging it with 39 grains H4350. Now, I will caution you, do not just duplicate this load and run it through your 243. If you want to use this load, make sure you start 10% lower and do a workup to make sure that there are not going to be any pressure problems in your rifle. Never duplicate a load without at least going through a 10% low workup to make sure that you're not going to have pressure problems in your rifle. Even two chambers cut by the same guy on the same day could have variances in them that will affect how that load responds in that rifle. So please heed this warning. Do not copy my load. Do not copy anyone's load without doing your homework and working it up first. This load in our rifle, in our 26-inch barrel Krieger, runs about 2950 on a standard day, so about 2,950 foot per second. It is not a hot 243 load. It's a fairly mild 243 load, but it still works very well, and it's going to be legal in just about any competition we run in. There is one local range that when that match director runs his competition, he's using borrowed steel, so he sets his speed limit at about 3,000 foot per second. I go just a little bit under that because if we're shooting it on a hot summer day, I don't want to go over his speed limit and get DQ'd from the match. So just a word on that. Now when we go through and we set our powder charges after our Charge Master has warmed up, we'll go ahead and dump the powder. I'll then take whatever powder charge is ready on one of the two Charge Masters, and I will dump it onto an RCBS Rangemaster 750 scale. Since I'm using two different Charge Masters, then the Rangemaster 750 is my gatekeeper. It's the one that makes sure that all my charges are uniform before they go on to the next one. There can be slight variances. The Charge Masters can be a little bit finicky at times, and I can get a 1/10 over or a 1/10 under. So when I pull them off, I'll dump them into the Rangemaster 750, verify the weight there, and then if I need to, I'll drop a couple of kernels out or I'll trickle a couple of kernels in, verify the weight, and then we'll go on and dump it into a funnel into one of our cases that's sitting ready in our loading blocks. One thing about loading blocks, they're a really good thing to have. If you don't want to spend money on loading blocks, for 308 class cartridges, that's 243, 260, 308, 65 Creedmoor, etc., you can use 45 ACP ammunition trays. So go to your range, find somebody that has used some good quality 45 ACP ammunition like Federal, and they will usually have a plastic tray that those cartridges sit in. And these will drop in those plastic trays perfectly. I have a whole mess of them that we got at the police range from the American Eagle 45 ACP training ammo. Great things to keep around. Grab yourself 10 or 15 of them. That way when they get grungy and nasty, you can just throw them away and not worry about them. If you want really, really nice loading blocks, Bell & Carlson sells a set of CNC machined aluminum blocks. They're just simply jewelry for your reloading bench. They are nice in that they are heavy duty. So if you have charged cases sitting in that block and you bump the block, it's less likely to go over and dump your cases everywhere. That block sits really well and really stable on the loading bench. Now once we've dumped our powder into the cartridge, I like to seat a bullet immediately after dumping the powder. This makes sure that we don't get confused and we don't get off and we don't end up seating a bullet on an empty case, or we don't end up overcharging a case. The charge that we're using with 39 grains of H4350, it's impossible to double charge a case because that case will overflow. It won't actually hold 2 whole charges. So when you dump the powder in, if it doesn't go down the funnel, you pull the funnel off and powder runs everywhere, you know you screwed that case up and you dump it. But you can seat a bullet on an empty case, and that is a bad thing when you're in competition because that will give you what's called a squib load. It will seat the bullet into the lands, and when you eject the case will come out, the bullet will not. It'll be jammed in your barrel, and the only way to remove it is going to be to get a cleaning rod and knock it out with a cleaning rod. So it will end up killing you on a stage. So I will dump my powder into my case through my funnel. I will take that case, remove the funnel, set the case on the press, place a bullet into the neck, and I will run it up into my seating die and seat that bullet. Now the seating die, I only use the seating die for this load, so it is always set to that, but I still want to check it. So once it comes out of the seating die, I will grab my calipers and I will check what the overall cartridge length is. The reason I'm checking the overall cartridge length is it needs to seat in my magazine. That's my first check. Now, once I've got that out and I've made sure that it's going to seat into the magazine, the consistency check is with a Hornady comparator. Now, the reason we use a comparator instead of just using an overall dimension is that the tips of these bullets, the me-plat, is not super consistent on every one. You can get a little bit of variance, which will give you a variance in your caliper of the overall length. This screws a lot of guys up because they end up monkeying with their seating die on every single bullet, trying to get it perfect. You're not going to get it perfect. And in fact, monkeying with that is going to change where the bullet engages the rifling on each cartridge, and it's going to give you very inconsistent results. So if you want to check and make sure that every bullet is seated consistently, then you need a comparator like this that has a hole. In this case, it's a hole specifically for the 243 bullets. And I can take my bullet and slide it into the comparator, and now I can get a reading from the bearing surface of the bullet to the case head. And this will tell me if I'm seating the bullets consistently every single time. Now the trick here is when you first make this cartridge up, you're going to make up a dummy round that has no primer and no powder, and you're going to seat the bullet where you want it, how far you want it off the lands, and put that cartridge aside. So when you break out your comparator, you're going to take your dummy cartridge, you're going to put it in, you're going to close it, you're going to turn your caliper on, and you're going to zero your caliper to your dummy round. That way, when you take this out of the seating die, your caliper's already zeroed out for what you want. You can throw it on there and make sure it reads 0. If it reads 0, you're good to go. Your bullet's seated where you want it. If it's way off, then you need to go do some work on your seating die. When you go through and you do your quality check on your ammunition, you can drop them in here real quick. You can see if they're dead on 0 or how far off 0 they are, and that's your go or no go on your ammunition. That is if you want to get super anal. What I generally do is I will set up my die, I will get it to the point that I need it to seat the bullet to match up with the dummy round, and then I will just run. I will spot check ammunition, but I won't measure each and every single one of these because I do realize that there are very small variances in the bullet that I have no control over. And without actually going through and sorting your bullets by bearing surface beforehand or by overall length, there's not a whole lot you can do on that. I don't think it makes a great difference in the accuracy of the cartridges. So once I get my seating die verified that it's where I want it, I will go ahead and run the ammunition and I will be done. I won't go back and touch that die again. As a spot check for my neck tension, what I will do is I'll pick up a cartridge before I seat a bullet. I will measure the outside neck diameter. I will zero the caliper on that outside neck diameter. I'll take my case, I will charge it, I'll seat a bullet, then I will measure the outside neck diameter again. Since I zeroed my caliper, I will want to see at least 0.02 on that readout. That tells me that I have enough tension on that neck, and that'll be good to go. And again, I'll just spot check that. Since we didn't make any changes to the neck sizing die as we went through, we'll be good to go. Once I have all of my ammunition loaded and placed in the box, then we're going to go back. I will grab the rifle. I will remove the firing pin assembly from the bolt of my rifle, which on the AI is very simple. You put the safety on, it's a quarter turn on the shroud, and the thing pops out and we're good to go. I will take each cartridge and run each cartridge I intend to fire at the match through the chamber of the rifle to make sure that I have smooth chambering and easy extraction. After each one of those has gone through, I will drop them back in the loading box. That box will be signed off on as okay to shoot the match. If you are really crazy about it or you're unsure, you can go back and you can weight check each cartridge. If you go weight check each cartridge, understand that there's going to be some variances in the weight because of the brass and bullet, mainly because of the brass. Brass weights will be a little bit off, but what you want to see is you want to see that you don't come up with one that's 39 grains light. If you have one that ends up 39 grains light, that one you forgot to charge and you need to reject it, pull it down, charge it, and then go forth with it. That's really all there is to loading our ammunition. One extra tip that I will give you is find some way to mark your cases so that you know that they are your cases. I've seen a variety of different methods. I think one of the best is a combination of stripes down the side of your case with magic marker. You can go get Sharpies in a variety of different colors, take the color combination you want, tape them together with some masking tape, sit them down on a table and just roll your cartridge against them, and you will get color bands on the case. Now these color bands are not going to get worn off just by one chambering and firing of your cartridge, but if it's a stage where you don't have time to get out and pick your brass up when you're done, then you can go back after 5 or 6 shooters have fired or after your stick is done with that stage, and you can easily find your cartridges or your brass cases out of the pile of other ones, because there are very good chance that somebody else is going to be shooting the exact same head stamp that you're shooting, and it'll be difficult to recover your brass afterwards, especially if you've done a whole lot of work to them, match prepping them and fire forming them in your chamber. So that's a really good option to keep your stuff straight. In the end, you're almost always going to lose a couple of cases at matches, and that's one of the reasons that I use Winchester brass instead of Lapua or Norma or any of the really expensive stuff. Sometimes you don't have a choice and you have to use that, but given the option, I'll go with Winchester brass because it's a good intermediate level brass. It's high quality, a lower cost, and when I lose a couple, I'm not crying. That's also why we don't go through the trouble of neck turning, because we use loose enough chambers. We don't need to neck turn to be able to actually shoot that ammo, and it's one less step when we end up losing brass. That's all the process that I go through to load my ammo. Now next week what I want to cover is I want to take you out to the range and show you how I verify that that ammo is good to go and get our numbers so we can make sure that we get our velocity and our ballistic tables lined out and we verify that the gun is dialed in. So that's coming up next week. If you guys have liked this episode, please make sure you like, share, and subscribe. If you've got any questions, leave them down in the comment section below or send them to us on Facebook or Twitter. And until next week, get out and shoot!